afternoon, good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me if technology helps us today. Welcome to the second NAV Skills webinar. Glad to have you here with us today, maybe again or maybe for the first time if you registered. We are currently looking at 61 people attending the webinar. I will give a brief update and then I will give the words to Søren Clemensen, who will be our speaker today. As I said, this is our second webinar. The previous webinar was an introduction to NAV 2016 events and extensions. You can find a recording of that in case you want to look at it again, or you have a colleague who you want to show it. And I'm very happy to say that since I put it there, it has been watched 302 times, which blows my expectations. So I was very happy with that. You can find it here again on YouTube. Today we have Søren Clemensen as a speaker. I will let him introduce himself in a second. He will do a deep dive into events for NAV 2016. I think the eventing in NAV 2016 is definitely one of the coolest things that Microsoft did in many years. This webinar, of course, is recorded as well. You can find it on the same YouTube channel afterwards. I will put it there probably tomorrow. This webinar is part of a series around the events and extensions. The next session will be with Gunnar Gessen from Iceland, and the schedule is probably end of February, beginning of March, depending on everyone's schedule. And you will find announcements on the channels that we always use, like Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, or you can go to the navskills.com website. So with that, I'm going to change the presenter to Søren and give the word to him. After Søren has finished with his presentation, you will be able to ask questions to him. You can use the Q&A possibility in the webinar for that, and I will try to organize it and read the questions to Søren the same way that Andrew did last time for me, and I hope I do half as good job as he did last time for me. So with that, Søren, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And I'll just see if I can figure out where the thing goes. Where's my show my screen? And let's see. With a bit of luck, you should be seeing my initial slide here.
We're good to go.
I can see it. Very good.
Awesome. So this is a deep dive into, well, I should first introduce myself. I'm a development manager at 360 Visibility in just outside Toronto in Ontario, Canada. I've lived over here for close to 10 years now, and have been part of the NAV world for it's getting pretty close to 2 decades now. So I've been around. I have a lot of fun with it. This is not work. This is just fun. This is passion. And today I'll give you a deep dive into eventing. It's new in 2016, as Mark told you last time, and I'll try and not create a lot of huge, nice examples that blows your mind, but I'll try and do a lot of step-by-step to walk through all the options and all the possibilities there are with events, so you have a deep knowledge of how it works and what things you can expect from it, and be fully skilled event developers when you walk out of here. And for some reason it doesn't change slide. I'll see if I can do it. That helps. So the agenda for today is what are events. Then we're going to look at event subscriptions and how they work, get more into that when I get to it. Global variables, what we can do, what we cannot do with global variables, including the sender, which is a an option to include the code unit or the instance of the code unit with the event. We were going to look at how permissions work with events. We're also going to look at instance control. How can we manage the instance of different events? That gets a little complex, a little hairy, but I wanted to make you experts. Then we're going to look at using events, or could call it best practices for using events, and we're going to look at debugging if we can make it. It's a pretty ambitious agenda, so I'm not totally sure we're going to make all of it, but we'll get to what we get to. So let's start with what are events. So events is a way to tie application business logic to existing application with no or very low footprint on the code. So it's a way for you to create functionality without ever touching the Microsoft code or the standard code. That sounds pretty Star Wars fiction-like, but it can be done. So it's done via two things. It's done with published events, and a published event is can be done two ways, and I'll show you that in next slide, I think. But it's basically an explicit way, explicit by writing code that creates an event in the code. So you can write code that raises an event for other people. So that's one way of doing it. Of course, when you write code, you are touching the standard code. So maybe that's not the best way of doing it always, but sometimes you need to create events, and we'll talk about that later too. Then there's the implicit way in the Microsoft runtime. So Microsoft actually raises a lot of events just by the platform. The things you got to be aware of always is there's no return values here. So there's no way of, there's nothing coming back there's nothing in a return value coming back to the published event. So, but you can pass things by reference, which I'm going to show too. Then there's so if you raise an event, and this is also important to know when you raise an event, if there's no subscribers, it has no performance impact. So if nobody subscribes to an event that you are raising, then there's no code getting executed. There's nothing happening, so it has no performance impact. Then you can subscribe to an event. So one thing is to raise an event. So that just makes something happen it tells the system that anybody subscribing to this event I just raised now needs to be executed. So the ones that subscribe to this event, they're called subscribers. So when you subscribe to an event, you can subscribe to a published event, or you can subscribe to a published event by code, or you can subscribe to a published event that is done by the platform. It's automatically called on runtime. You don't need to do anything. So if you subscribe to something, it's automatically called. That subscription is automatically triggered when you raise the event. There's nothing to be done there. And the subscriptions are all stored in event subscriptions, which is a table in NAV, virtual table. So I'll show you that too. So what are events? Well, events are a modern .NET concept that's been introduced into CAL. It's commonly used in .NET. It's a very powerful way of doing it. And of course, it gives us a whole bunch of advantages that I'll talk about in a moment. But first, let's just look at what events are for a second. And I will open up my NAV here. So I created a little foo example here. I love my foo functions. And actually, I'm just going to create it from scratch. So I'm just going to delete this one, and I'll create one from scratch. So I'm going to create a new code unit. So first of all, I need to create a function, and I'm going to call it foo. It's a local function. There's nothing special about this. Then I can take the properties on that function, and I can say this is a publisher, meaning that this event publishes publicizes an event that you can subscribe to. As soon as you see that, you're going to have an event type show up here. The event type can be business or integration. So in this case, I'll do integration. I'm talking a little bit about what the difference is between the two. Technically, there's no difference. It is just a naming. It doesn't matter if you do choose one or the other from a functional or technical point of view. It's just as in how much you're promising when you are creating the event, and I will talk extensively about that. So we've created an event, and I'm going to save the code unit. So we'll call it 50,000. Call it my foo, and we now have an event here. I can also call this function, of course. I know it's not standard Microsoft, but I always like to put brackets behind because that way I know it's a function. So now I have a function. If I run this code unit, it will call this function here, and this is a foo function, which is my event. So I'm raising this event in the code. These functions, when you raise an event, cannot have any code. If I would write anything here, I will get a compile error right away. You can't have code in here. They have to be empty. So let's do that. And now we're going to subscribe to this one. Now, of course, technically, normally you would subscribe from somewhere else, but in this case, let's try and subscribe from within this this code unit itself. So I'm going to create another function called onFoo, which is my subscriber, and I'll go in and say the run properties of this one, that this is a subscriber. I'll say this has to subscribe to code unit 50,000. That's why I saved it before I went in here, otherwise I couldn't do this. And it has to subscribe to my only event in this code unit, which is my foo function. And then it's going to ask if you want me to use the signature. I'm just going to say yes. In this case, there is not much of a signature, so we'll talk extensively about that in a minute. So I now have a function, an event called foo. I'm calling my event foo when I run this code unit. And I have another function that subscribes to this. I'm just going to put a message box in here with the famous hello world. And if I run this function now, we'll take a second just to get the... I'm getting hello world, and I did the hello world. I never ever call this, right? It's the event that makes sure that that is triggered. So that's how that's how you make an event. That's how you create your own event and you subscribe to it. Now let's try and look at something else. Let's look at something else you can do. And I'm just going to load my example here. Okay, so I have my currency example. In this, you will see me delete and create new examples all the time, because if I run the same table and I had all the examples in here all the time, the events would ensure that they all fired at the same time, and it would be very confusing. So here I have a little example of another event. Another subscriber. If you see this one, it's an event subscriber. It subscribes to the, it's called OnNewCurrency, and it subscribes to the, and I can show you that here. So this subscribes to the currency table, and the event that it subscribes to is on after insert event. So, and I'll give you a list of events that you can subscribe to. This is a platform event. I don't need to create this event. It is already there. It's done by the platform. Any table you can go in and say, I want to subscribe to the on after insert, and your event will trigger without doing anything else. And I put a message box in here just to say which, just a message box telling you which currency has been created. So let's try and look at this. The code unit is here. I've not touched my currencies whatsoever, so I'm going to start up my client. Okay, and we'll go to currencies. And I'm going to create a new currency. So I'm going to create my currency here. Okay, and as soon as I do that, currency AA has been created. That is the message from my event. I did zero work on standard Microsoft. I never ever touched standard Microsoft. So I'm just gonna, for cleaning up here, because I'm gonna create this again. So I'm just gonna, before I get the error message, I'm gonna go and delete the new currency here and close this again. So back to my presentation, and it sits here. So that's how you do that. Now let's talk a little bit about why you should use events and why we're using events. Let's make sure I'm on time here. Yeah. So first of all, they have a low footprint on the code, or actually sometimes you can do it so they have no footprint on the standard code. That means lower cost of ownership, because you don't need to merge code later. You don't need to deal with the issues we all know there exist with customizing code. So fast and easy upgrades, and it also reverses the dependency. Normally, we are when you create code, you're creating code in the Microsoft code. You're changing the Microsoft code, and you are writing lines of code in there. So when it changes, your code is getting obsolete, and needs to be changed, and needs to be modified. Now this reverses the dependency. Now it's your code is depending in the event world is on the Microsoft event only. So as long as the event is there, your code is fine. Your code works. Your code will not need to change, depending on what you do, but technically. It also enables extensions, so you can be plugged in, and you can plug something in and you can take it out again. So basically you can, with the event, you can plug something into to a product, and you can take it out or you can turn it off without ever touching any other things. The last thing is I always like to mention hooks, because hooks is like the predecessor of events. So events is a bit of hooks on steroids, maybe. I don't think events is a replacement for hooks. I think there's still a strong use for hooks, and I think there's still a strong need for hooks. But events have some definitely has some benefits compared to hooks. However, hooks has some benefits compared to events too. So in some cases, hooks are the way to go. In some cases, events are the way to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on too. Then we have the event types. I just showed you an event raised in the code, an integration event. There's three types of events that are raised in the code: business, integration, and system. I won't go into the system events. They're left all to Microsoft. Business events and integration events are the two that we can create. The only difference between the two, and I hinted to it when you have to choose integration or business, is just the promise. When you do a business event, you're promising that this event, basically you're promising that this event will never ever change. And integration events are more loose that, yeah, there's a great event here. We will try never to change it, but you never know. So
Søren,
yes.
I might be wrong, but isn't it also true that with a business event you cannot inherit global variables?
I actually have never created one, so I can't tell you.
Okay, I don't like the principle to start with, but I thought that was a difference. So
I
apologize
have.
for interference.
Okay. That's okay. That's okay. That's something we could test out. But the business events are definitely Microsoft likes to separate the two, and at current time there is absolutely no business events in the application. Microsoft has not created a single one.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you have events that are raised by the platform. Currently in 2016, they are limited to tables and pages. So there's table trigger events and there's page trigger events. That's the only events that are built in to the platform in 2016. All other events are raised in the code at this time. So the page triggers that are available in the platform are listed here. So on before action, on after action, and they are all standard events that the platform gives you the ability to use without having to do anything.
Waldo just confirmed the story about the global variables.
It's good to have Waldo as our backup, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and he has the advantage, he can actually code and check it.
There's another question, but I don't know if it's too soon. Maybe you will answer it during the session.
Just go ahead.
If there's a difference between event publisher or subscriber being a local function or a public function. But I think you will touch on that, right?
I will touch on that, yes. Subscribers in my world are always local. There is absolutely no reason in my, as far as I can see, to ever create them as globals.
Okay.
So there was a page trigger events, and let's get back to the presentation here. And here's the table trigger events. So these are the ones that are currently available in 2016. And again, we have before and after delete, before and after insert, before and after modify, before and after rename. And then we have a validate event. So a validate event is a little special in the fact that you need to then identify what field it is the validate is being run on. So I think, Mark, you showed this one in the initial presentation, if anybody saw that. The other ones are, of course, on the entire record and triggers for the entire record. So events raised in code. And I guess I already told you this. So business events are implicit contract, they will never change. While integration events, we should of course never try to change them, but they need to. We have not promised we won't do it. So currently there's 110 plus. I heard Waldo say 128 events in the standard application, all integration events that are part of 2016. So these type of events can be placed by any developer. The main thing I think here is that if you need to place an event in the standard Microsoft code, you might as well do a hook. You could, I mean, there's no difference in what you do. The hook or the event will do the same thing. In most cases, you have to touch the standard code. So in reality, it would be better if Microsoft had an event there. But anybody can do it. When it comes to placing an event, I think it's more valuable for the people that create verticals or create add-ons in horizontals, that they put the events already there for the people developing on top of their application. It gives them a better experience of integrating to their application. Okay, and then we have the global raised. There's a lot of events here. Globally events raised in code. So that's mainly code unit 1. And there's a lot of events raised in code unit 1. I actually think the next slide is showing it. No. So they're subset of the events raised in code. They're mainly in code unit 1. And I have a list of them, but I probably didn't make a slide for it. But it's things like global triggers, find your printer, list, or build number. So you can modify, or you can attach, if you build verticals or you build your own software on top of Microsoft, you can actually modify the version list that is getting displayed without having to go in and change code unit 1. We all know how annoying that can be. Now I'm going to talk a little about events raised in the platform, and then we're going to do a lot of demos. So events raised in the platform always run. That's something we're not used to. We're used to that if we don't run the onInsert true, the trigger won't run. That's not the case with events. If you run an insert true or false, the event will run. The before and after insert will run. So you also have to know that events run serial, so that means they run one after another. They don't run parallel. There's nothing parallel here. It's still total serial execution as we used to. But you got to know that the subscribers execute in a random order, non-deterministic. So I will right away say that is not completely true. Actually, it's not true. But that's the only thing Microsoft promises. So if you start creating code that depends on the execution order of your subscribers, you could run into a lot of trouble. So make sure you do not do that. The way that they do execute today is basically based on ID number and then the alphabetic order of the functions within that ID. But Microsoft does not promise anything, so be careful with that. That's knowledge that really you don't need to know, because you shouldn't program based on that. So demo time, and we'll switch back to, if I can find my. Okay, so the second part of this demo with the currency that I just showed you before. It's very simple message here. So we saw before that this gets executed, and I told you that even though I don't run the onInsert trigger, it still gets executed. So I'm going to try and create. Could probably write this a little neater, but works. I'll try and create a currency in the code. So I'll run this code unit. It will init, create a currency called AAA, and insert it with no true. So let's see what happens if I do that. So we should get launch the client in a second here. Yep. And we should get a pop-up currency A was created. So the event triggered, even though I didn't run the onInsert trigger. So that's a very good thing to know. So let's just just delete the currency again here. I might as well leave this open. So that's the big thing about this. That is that you gotta know that happens. And that was the one I just showed you. So let's just, I think I have. Next thing I want to show you is another demo. And here we're gonna look at the run trigger. So let's go back to, I'm gonna do a lot of demos, so I hope you like that. So I'm gonna delete example 1 here, so it doesn't interfere with what we're doing. And I'm gonna import example 2. Okay, so example 2 here is basically the same thing. So I got my event, but I got, before the message, I'm just putting in if on run trigger. So the run trigger is passed as part of the event signature from this system event that gets raised, or from the platform event that gets raised. So and that basically tells you if the run trigger is being run. So if it's a run true or if it's a run false, or sorry, insert true or insert false. So let me go back. It works exactly the same way, and I have my function here without the init. That doesn't matter. So let's try and go into the platform. Notice I just loaded this, right? So I didn't do anything. I'll go into my platform here, and I'll say new, and I'll do AAA, and I'll just say OK, and my event gets raised. My event gets raised here because it runs with insert true. It's user defined. So I'll go and delete my AAA, and I'll minimize this, and I'll go to my function here where I created via code with no insert true. Run this, and what you're going to see is hopefully that NAV starts up. We don't get a message. There was no message here. Nothing. So let me just go back to, let's start a separate instance of it. So let's go back here and refresh this. And see, but it did actually create my currency. So my currency did get created, but it didn't trigger my event. Or it did trigger my event, but I escaped out of it. So let's go back a second again. That's right. So I only run my message, or my message box. I only run it if actually the trigger is true, and it's not true in the second area. So that's a way to control if you want things to trigger or not. If you wanted to follow the standard logic, or you wanna do it in all cases, and that's an important thing to know. So let me go back here to my presentation again. So, and here's the global events raised. This is the slide I was actually looking for earlier. I thought that was in a different location, but that's okay. So this is all the global events in Code Unit 1 that Microsoft has standardly included in Code Unit 1. You got things like system indicator, you got things like application version, company before company open, after company open, before company close, after company close, fine printer. You got a lot of great things here. You also got the globals, so on global, insert, modify, and delete, and you got the on after database triggers, insert, modify, and delete. So the difference between them, of course, is that the globals are the ones that execute based on pages. So they only execute if the user is actually doing something in a page, while the database insert, modify, delete, and rename, of course, executes no matter what. So very powerful tools that are standard part of Code Unit 1. I'm not going to go show in demos on these ones. You probably know already what they do, and you know how you can get to them. So next thing is event subscriptions. I want to show you how event subscriptions work, because it can be really hard to figure out how these things are linked together. If you go to Tools, Debugger, and Event Subscriptions, you will see this page show up. And I hope you can see the whole page. Mine cuts off the edges here, but that's okay. Basically shows you the event subscriptions. It shows you who the publisher is, and it shows you who the subscriber is. So I don't know on your screen, but on my screen it's just cut off a little bit to the left here. But the first column here is the subscriber, and the column over here is a publisher ID, tells you what the publisher is, who the publisher is, and what function within the publisher you're looking at. One of the things that you have to notice here, and we'll get back to that a little later, there's an active column. So you can actually have subscriptions that are active, and you can have subscriptions that are non-active. That sounds a little weird, but that is also a little weird, but I'll show you how it works. So event subscriptions, so how does it work? So when the server starts up, it searches all code units, with subscriber methods. Among those code units, it then searches for all the subscriber methods in those codes. So now it has all the people that try to subscribe to something. Then for each subscriber method, it finds the event itself, so the published event method. So it finds that for each subscriber, and it pairs the two together, and it inserts it into the event subscribers. The screen I just showed you, this screen here. But it also includes any subscriptions that failed. So if you have something that subscribes to something that doesn't exist or something like that, it will fail, and it will still be in the list of event subscribers, and you'll still be able to see it. So it's a great place to go in and see if there's something that has gone wrong, and so you have something that is missing or out of sync that you need to go and fix.
Søren?
Yes.
We have a question from Daniel. If you can manually deactivate events from the list?
No.
No. So they are subscribed, and if you want to unsubscribe them, you have to actually delete the object, or?
There is, to my knowledge, no other way of doing it. That's yes.
Automatically binds.
It automatically binds. There's no way of turning it off.
Okay, thank you.
Except one way, and I'll show that later. But that's kind of not the way I want you to do it. But there's something called
binding.
Yeah, there's a manual binding that's going to come, and I'll tell you about. I'll show you that later.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the event subscriptions and how they work. Then there's global variables, and I can see we need to speed it up if we need to make it this. So global variables is, and I don't know if I have a demo. Yes, I do demo that. So let's just go and do a demo and go walk through it. So global demos, this is global, so this is my favorite example. This is my foo, my big foo example, my big foo test here. So let's delete this one. And to Daniel, I can also say that is exactly, that's exactly why I import and delete the objects, because if I didn't, I would have events pop up like left, right, and center all the time, and it doesn't work that way. So global variables. I have this one here, little example of an event. It's very similar to the one I just created a moment ago, except I've created here a global text constant. I've put that equal to hello world. I call my foo event, and then I have an event subscriber here that subscribes to this event. So it's very simple. This is a global variable. This raises an event. This subscribes to the event. What would be the expectations? And I bet, I don't know, I'm not gonna, you can't answer, but a lot of people will probably say it's gonna say my text is hello world. So let's just try it out and see if it does that. And let's see if it runs. Always takes a second before it runs. And it doesn't. Why doesn't it say hello world here? Well, the reason it doesn't say hello world is because, and we can show it here. Well, the first thing I guess I should say is when you call or when you raise an event, you actually, so this event gets raised. This event gets raised and this subscriber gets called. But when you call the subscriber, you're calling another instance of the code unit. It's not aware of the original. So even though this subscriber here is inside my own code unit, it's not aware of anything from up here. It's another instance of it. But how do you make it work then? Well, you can get access to the global variables, and there's if you go to the functions, there's a property here that says global variable access, on the when you raise the event. So I'm going to set it to yes in this example. So this is my second test. It's pre-programmed it. This is the only thing I did. I just said yes, access to global variables. So let me run that and see what it works, and it doesn't. I can promise you. It still doesn't work. So I hope it didn't click too fast. I hope you all saw it. So why doesn't it work? Well, I should show you this still. It's still a second, right? When I call, when this subscriber gets called, it's another instance. So even though I told this event here that Marcus comment now that it has access to my global variables, it doesn't know it when it gets over here.
Yeah, and I have a question from Daniel again. Would you normally have subscribers and publishers in the same code unit? You notice people notice that you are doing the publishing and the subscribing in one code unit. I think I can guess the answer, but
no, you would not.
This is just for demo purposes.
This is just for demo purposes to basically so you learn to understand. And I am splitting them up. If you go down at the end of this, you will have two because each example has a publisher and a subscriber. Yeah. I'm just doing it purely for demo purposes, so you can see the steps you need to go through in order to get to where you are.
Okay.
So you learn
thank
it.
You. Yep.
So where were we? Yes, we were doing a global. So we gave the function access to the globals, but that didn't help. So what we're going to do now is, and that's the trick here. That is, you can down here in your subscriber, you can define locals, and in this case, I've defined my text as text. Has the same name as the global up in the first area, and it's the same type. But I don't define it on my event because this one just triggers this. So I can basically define, because I said I want to have global access, I can define this variable to be passed over to my subscriber. As soon as I do that, it works. So let's see if it works. Let's hope it works. Otherwise it looks, yay, hello world. So the hello world now got passed over because I defined my subscriber, I defined the global variable as part of the signature of my subscriber. And it understands that, okay, that means I have access to the global variables from where I was called. So that means I now have that global variable where I am.
And this is, as far as I know, and I think Waldo confirmed it, not possible with business events.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I trust Waldo. I'll just say correct. Okay, so what about by reference? If I would change my global variable to by reference down here, and I would change my variable, my global variable. So I define my global variable to hello world. I trigger my event. The event triggers, this is the function for the event. The event triggers the event subscriber. So I erase the event and I trigger this event subscriber. The event subscriber receives the global variable my text by reference. I change the value of my text. I go back here and the message, I call the message. So what happens if you do that? And let's just have it run here. Hallelujah, it works perfect. So you can actually grab a global variable, pass it to an event, change it, and it will return to the original location. Now, before I go on any further in this part here, doing exactly that is, of course, has a challenge. It sounds great. I mean, this is just awesome. But you don't know if anybody else is subscribing to the same event, and you don't know which order the events get executed in. And most of all, you don't know if they're modifying the same variable as you are. So it has some challenges when you start modifying global variables, unless you know you're the only one subscribing to something and you can control everything that happens after that. If you have multiple add-ons that subscribes to the multiple same events and they all start changing the same variables, it does give some challenges. That said, next test here is that is to pass the sender itself. So include the sender. I should show you here. So you actually have an option here to include the sender. So include the sender means you include the instance of the code unit you're calling from, or that raises the event. So if I do that, and I did a little clunky example here on it, but it kind of works. So I have an on run. Run, I take my counter and I increase it by 1. Then I run my foo, which is my event that I'm raising, and I subscribe to that event. As you see in the signature here of that event subscriber, the sender is my code unit example, and I have my counter. I'm passing my counter over as an integer. So that instance that I'm running here gets passed to my event subscriber, and my counter gets passed to my event subscriber. So what is my counter? And the first time I get this called, it's 1. And when I then check if counter is less than 5, then I'm going to call my run function up here again. So because this is passed over and it's by reference, this is the same instance. So when I call this second time, I'm calling the same instance of it, meaning now the counter is going to be 2, and it's going to do it all again. Then the counter is going to be 3, 4, and 5, and when it hits 5, it's not going to call it. It's going to create the message. So this is a great little example of counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to show how it works. So let's just try and run it, and we should get it count down from 5 to 1 if it runs. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a funny way to launch the space shuttle, but it works. So any questions on that? Because that is a little hairy, and if you don't get this, it's going to be very tricky as I keep going. Just ask questions right away, because this becomes more and more difficult as we go down the example row here, and I'm only halfway.
Yeah, and we had two questions which are still unanswered, and one is can I pass the reference by reference a code unit, and I think that is answered by your last demo.
Yes.
My question would be, if I can ask a question, is that I get the idea of events from a sense of upgradability and straightforward subscribing to an event, and then not having to change the source code of Microsoft. Do you see any business value of this funky stuff with global variables and single inheritance features? I mean, what would be the reason why Microsoft did this? Why did they spend time on this?
Why they spend time on events in general, or why they spend time on?
on
On the
this funky
globals.
stuff. Yeah.
On the global stuff, yeah.
Because
So
I don't find it like ending up in clean code.
that was what I was trying to lead to with the globals, right? The globals, it's tricky, and it depends what you're doing and who so what you're implementing. Because if you start modifying the globals and other events start modifying the globals, and you're not in charge, and you don't know what order they get executed in, there's a difference between the difference between adding 100 to something and then subtracting 10%, or subtracting 10% and adding 100.
Yeah, and Waldo, we should unmute Waldo because he's commenting with good stuff, and his opinion is that the global vars are only there to support extension of code unit 80, which I kind of agree on. But on the other hand, if we can kind of agree on the fact that as an implementer you shouldn't create events where it's Microsoft's responsibility, then it kind of eliminates all business cases of doing that.
Yes, so I don't encourage people to use the globals, because at least not modify them. Use them fine, don't modify them, because you do run into, you're just making it more complex, and you run into situations where, or at least you can run into situations where you get totally unexpected things, and it's very hard to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, we have one question we can, but it's basically what about transactions? Does eventing implements your database transactions? Does it commit for every event, or is it one big transaction? How does it work?
So it's one big transaction. There's no change here. The events gets called. They're not independent transactions in any way, form, or shape. They're part of the single transaction pattern that we're used to today.
And what if you put a commit into an event subscriber?
Yeah.
Then you should be fired, right?
Yes, basically.
Okay. Yes.
At least you should get a scolding and a slap with a ruler or something.
Exactly. Okay. Well,
at least I would not. I mean, I cannot come up with an example where that would be a good idea.
You're not hiring, are you, Mark?
I guess that's why I'm still a freelancer.
No. Yeah.
Okay. I'll leave it. We're distracting you, Søren. Please continue.
That's okay. You're stealing my time.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm going to keep building on this and try so because I want to make sure you understand the complete picture of this. And I'm going to switch to something called manual binding. So what's manual binding? And I'll just show you where you can actually see it. Except not here, of course. No. I should. Now you're going to fire me. So here, up here, there's default. This field is, I'm not going to change it now, but default, this one is standing to static automatic. Now, static automatic means that it's a new instance every time of the code unit, and there's no, the binding is just automatic. It automatically binds the subscriber to the event, and it's a new instance every time. This case, I've switched it to manual. So what does that mean? Well, this is the complete standard example that I started out with. I got a hello world, I call my event, and my subscriber is set to subscribe to this event here. However, the manual binding is turned on. So what happens when you run this? Absolutely nothing. I hope I can go a few minutes over time because I can see that is going to be needed. So nothing happens. The event doesn't fire. So why doesn't it not fire? And I'm splitting it in two here, just to start making it a little more simple. So I now have my event, my text hello world. I have my event down here, and I'm gonna raise my event here. And over in my subscriber, I just have the exact same event. So this does exactly the same as it did before. No change. I'm not going to run this one. It does the same thing as before. But I'm going to show you what happens over here. So here I define my code unit. So I define my code unit as a local, in this case a local. I could do this as a global too, but it doesn't matter in this case. So define my code unit 5008 as a local variable. And I then say bind subscription. So I said binding, event binding was manual. And now I'm in the code saying, let me bind my subscription to this code unit, and then raise my event, and have the, doesn't need to change it, and then have the subscriber over here with a local event that is raised. Okay, so let's see what happens. This one you can disregard for now. So if I run that, it should actually connect the two to each other now. You get hello world. So the thing is that because it's manual binding, I have to bind my event. And what actually happens when you do this binding is that in the event subscriptions I showed you before, you remember there was an active column? It turns that on, because until you bind it, it's just not active. So that's kind of interesting. So what can we do with that, or how does that work? And I'm going to show you a little example here. Because it also means as soon as you bind it manually, you basically have the same instance. The instance doesn't change then. So that and Daniel was asking earlier about, can you turn it off and can you turn it on? Yes, you can turn it on and off. There's actually an unbind subscription function too here. But in this case, I'm just binding it just to demonstrate that. But you can unbind the subscription too. So you can actually, if you choose to manually bind, I wouldn't recommend it in very many cases, because why would you do that? But you just have to remember it becomes the same instance. So as soon as you do this, and I did a little example here where I call a function in my code unit. It's going to set a variable, and then I'm going to bind the subscription, and I'm going to raise the event, and the event here is going to raise, and then it's going to go to my function here. The first thing I did was I set this value, and then I raise the event. Manual binding, it's the same instance. So when I now raise my event, I can actually include my subscriber text, because that's a global variable in this code unit. So let's just see how that works. So let me run that. So you see, it actually added the hello to my world behind the hello world. So it does. It's a single instance. It's a single instance of it when you do manual binding, and you just got to be aware of that. It's a big difference, and something that you got to be totally aware of. The other thing that you could do here when you do this is you can of course create your subscriber as a single instance. I didn't do an example on that here, but you all know single instance code units, and you could create your subscriber as a single instance. So when you then raise it, it's always going to be the same instance of the code unit that's getting raised. That was my foo example, and that should give you a very good knowledge about how you can play with events. Including sender, I already did this demo. Instance control, I think I did that demo too, in order to speed things up. Permissions, and I am just gonna show you quickly how permissions is coming here. So let me just show you permissions very quickly. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about permissions. I'm just going to show you where to find them. So on the subscribers, it's only on the subscribers, you have two properties here: missing license or missing permissions. So if the license the user is using does not have access to the code unit or the subscriber object, then you can decide what happens. You can say, I want to error out, or I want to skip. Default is error out, so it just errors out, just like normal.
Excuse
you don't
me,
have
Sharon.
access, you're going to get an error.
Sharon, it is the
Sorry.
top of the hour. Understand you may be going a little long. Do you know about how long you will need?
Another 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, and if folks do have to leave the webinar now, you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you. It's all yours, Soren.
Okay. So this just, you can decide if you want to skip the event, so the event doesn't execute, or you want to error out as normal. This is kind of handy for when you do verticals, or you do things that want to plug and play. And that you can do the same with permissions, so users that don't have access to certain areas of the application can get an error, or they can skip the event totally. So that was that. No, we don't want to save that. Oops. So what else? And I actually, I had a screenshot of it here too. So I'm going to talk about using events. I did have a few more demos, but I will skip those ones for now. What have we learned? So best practices for event publishers, and you don't. I'm sure there's going to be a few that don't agree with me, but that's okay. This is what I think is best practices for event publishers. When you create them, always, so this is when you create them in code, right? Because you don't create, there's no other way to event publishers. The platform ones, you don't have any influence on it anyway. So always place the event publisher in the same object as they're raised. What I mean with that is, if you're raising an event in code unit, in a posting code unit, put that event publisher in that object. It's much easier to find it, and it's local. You can create actually saying that they should only be raised locally. Anyway, says that a bit further down. Make them descriptive as what the event is as to what event is raised. So what are they doing? What's the scenario, right? Do not start naming them based on what code is happening. I did that in my example because it's little small examples that don't have any real meaning. But like on customer credit limit exceeded, right? It's not on after it's not something else, right? It's clearly what is happening here, right? You know what you're subscribing to, so you know what is going to happen, right? And the same as the other example I have here. Event publishers should generally be local. I think they should be local always. That said, I noticed Microsoft has a few that are global, and I just have absolutely. The only reason that you would have a global publisher is because you want to raise it multiple places, and you want to raise it from outside the object that you're in. I think that's bad practice. I think it's going to be extremely confusing, and it's going to be it's just going to be a nightmare. So I would say always put them local, always make them local, only raise them in the object that you're in. In most cases, only raise them once, because there's not a whole bunch of reasons to raise events multiple times in different places. It becomes a little hairy too. Waldo might have other things to say about that, but that's okay. I think I agree with him in this case. Event subscribers, when creating a new module, create one or more code units dedicated to host all event subscribers for the module. Do not put other functionality into these code units. The only reason I say more code units here, that is, you could have different areas within one module that you want to have different code units to take care of. But basically what it is it's a kind of facade pattern, if you are familiar with that pattern, design pattern. So it makes it very simple to find out what's going on. It makes it very simple to say, I have my interface here as to what I'm interacting with. And it's easy to go and find what you're interacting with. If you put them all over the place, it becomes cluttered and very, very, yeah, I just don't do that. I would hate to read code like that. Event subscribers should always be local. There's absolutely no reason that I can find to make them global. They are local, they subscribe, and they trigger. Everything works fine. There's no problems. Make them local. Do not ever make them global. Unless somebody can explain to me what the benefit would be of it, I can't find one. And then I have this always test if is temporary. Is temporary is a new, well, it was on record refs before, but now you can actually write it like customer dot is temporary. So you can check if a customer is temporary. I have an example on this, but in light of the time we had, I'm not going to show it. So when you raise an event, when you write a subscriber, always test if it's temporary. In 99.9% of the cases, you don't want to do anything to the variable if it's temporary anyway. So just if it's temporary, exit right away. That's just good practice, in my opinion, for event subscribers. Best practice in general, be careful with modifying existing values. So that's again the globals. If you start modifying standard Microsoft functionality and other people do and you don't know which order it gets executed in, it does become a little hairy. So that's the unofficial handle pattern that Mark has in his blog here. It kind of shows you how you can deal with some of this stuff, but it doesn't show you how to deal with the execution order if both have to be dealt with. So.
No, and it's not. It's on my blog, but the pattern is an invention of Thomas Helsberg, the principal architect of NAV. So I only wrote it down on my blog.
Okay.
I don't want to take any credit.
No. We'll put credits where credits is due. The other thing I think is when you write this is design is important. Design is always important. Design is extremely important. But where I think events really shine is when you do things that complement and extend the functionality, not change the standard NAV functionality. When you start changing the functionality, like I said, you get a lot of unintentional things happening, and it hurts your standard testing because the standard test tools will have to start changing them to make them work with how the functionality is now. So I think that the biggest thing, and I think this is especially where extensions that is going to come next with our next session, that's you're extending the functionality to do something that is complementing the existing functionality. You're not going in and saying, I'm going to change the posting function. That's where events really shine in my view, and I still use hooks to a great extent in the form that if I have to go in and change something anyway in standard Microsoft, I might as well use a hook. I don't need to use events. Just because. But then again, I'm also a vertical developer, so most of my time is dedicated to a vertical product and not to customizations. But I just wanted to raise the point. I think it's something everybody should be thinking clearly about. Debugging, well, there's really nothing new in debugging. Debugging just works exactly like it did. You just turn on the debugger and it will run through and you will see the events and everything is fine. Questions and answers. I think I stuck to my 10 minutes, 9 minutes, so we've got 1 minute.
Very good. Yeah. If you count the 10 minutes that we're running out of time, we have 1 minute left for Q&A, but I'm not going anywhere, and we'll just tie Søren to his chair. So let's see if we have some questions. And I think this is actually a good question. What are the benefits for hooks over events? And I kind of like during the previous webinar talked a little bit about it as well, but what is your view on that, Søren?
So to me, if there is no event to tie to, I guess that's the first thing. If there's no event to tie to and you need to create an event, what's the difference between creating an event and a hook? There's really none, because you're doing customizations anyway.
Yeah, so from a merging perspective, you're touching Microsoft code. So by the next time you get a cumulative update or a release, you have to merge the change anyway.
Yes,
so from that perspective, there's no difference.
With one exception, you need to define the hook code unit, which you don't if you do an event.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you can use the go-to definition, which you cannot with an event. There's no go-to definition with an event because there can be multiple event subscribers.
Yes, that is one thing too. And the other thing that I think is big here, that is, if you're depending on execution order,
yes,
then the hooks shine pretty bright compared to events.
And what maybe is interesting for people to know, and just in case you don't, you can request events at Microsoft. If you think you need an event for a specific business case, you can go to Connect, and there's, I think Arend-Jan Kaufman has a link on his blog where you can request the event in the new version. And I've already seen some cool new events in Madeira. One of the things that I was completely confused is that CodeUnit 2 doesn't have an event, which is there in the next release. And now Microsoft can kill me for breaking NDA. Next question.
I cannot confirm or deny that.
Exactly.
So I think that's the main thing. Hooks and events. The main thing is execution order, and you just need to be aware of that.
This is an interesting question. I like this. Can you make an event subscriber run asynchronous?
Yes. No, you can't. Not the event subscriber itself, but you can make the event subscriber start another session.
Start another session, yeah. So with start session, you can actually start a second session and start a background transaction, but that doesn't really have something to do with events.
No.
But like you said, you can combine it.
Yeah. So the answer is no, but you can have the event start something that is a separate session.
I have a good question from my good friend Dave Mechanic. Does Microsoft plan to enforce coding standards with ISVs?
That's a Microsoft question.
Yeah, and of course we cannot answer that as because we are not at Microsoft. I can give my opinion, which is yes, please. I've been pushing Microsoft to release their pre-cal code for a very long time. Microsoft internally, if you look at the Microsoft code, then you can see that their code base is very much the same. You can compare CodeUnits 80 and 90 and be on compare or another compare tool, and you'll see that everything is almost exactly the same. And one thing that Microsoft is using internally to achieve that is that they use a tool called precal, which is a C# tool that they run on text files. And it would really be good for the partner channel if Microsoft would release that so everyone can run that and then maybe have that part of the CFMD process. I've seen add-ons which are CFMD which just makes your eyes hurt, really. Makes you cry. And I think, Søren, you know which one I'm talking about.
No comment.
No comment.
No comment. Can you force an error in an event subscription code, like cancel a transaction? So can an event roll back the transaction with an error?
Yes. So the event is when the subscriber executes. So the event itself not, because there's no code in the event, but the subscriber, you can have an error message that is within the subscriber is executing within the transaction. So if you throw an error message in the subscriber, the whole transaction will roll back.
Yeah, exactly. Unless someone has put a commit in.
Yeah.
And then they lose their
we'll
job.
bring out a fiery squad,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Any other questions? It's good questions here.
Yeah, I have a comment from Daniel. The decision is really whether you want to publish the event for others to subscribe to, and with a hook you have more control. Yeah, a hook is more something that you do as a developer if you don't have an event to subscribe to, and an event is something that you do if you own the code, right?
That's one way of looking at it, and yes.
Did you put any events in your add-on for others to subscribe to?
Yes.
Okay. So in your vertical solution, you have events. So if I buy your product as a customer, I can make small modifications.
Yeah,
and then if you come with a community update, you're not breaking anything.
Yes. Well, that's a long and a short answer to that, but yes.
Yeah, and we're running out of time. So I think with this, we should consider closing the session. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to send Søren an email, but you can also email me, of course. Find me via my blog. There will be an evaluation based on this webinar in English this time, Dave. The previous evaluation was sent in Dutch, and I apologize for that. I didn't want to resend it. I do encourage everyone to fill in the evaluation because we need the feedback to determine sessions for next time and stuff like that. I would like to thank Søren for doing this and spending time. I know that clean code is something you have been very enthusiastic of for a very long time. Let's not start about surrogate keys now because that'll add at least 45 minutes.
Oh no, let's.
to this session. Søren and I spend a lot of time in Denmark talking to people like Thomas Helsberg and Morten Jensen about this. And please do know that this is version 1 of events and extensions, and there will be more in the future. I think one of the key takeaways of Søren's session is that there is some funky stuff in events that you need to handle with care. But events is very powerful from a perspective of making your software easy to upgrade. So thanks, Søren.
And thank you, Mark.
And thank you, Rick, for hosting us.
And thanks, everybody, for joining us. We had a great number of people showing up. Certainly a very keen interest in this particular topic. Thank you all, and bye for now.
See you next time. Bye.